So let's get into defining that, since I keep saying it. To me, tangential content is literally just zooming out a little bit. So if you think about topical content is your product and your service talking about these things explicitly, or even your company culture, or like things happening in your company, acquisitions, whatever. Like if you're brand new, the press release cycle happens. These are really on topic for your company. Frankly, it's either for conversion purposes, like you're really trying to sell, which you need to do, or it's for more standard PR. But that's where you're dealing with the topical side of things. But this is a spectrum of content and a spectrum of intent, right? So on the other side, you're getting more tangential. This is more about your overall objective as a company, not necessarily about the sale, but it's like, why do you exist as a company, right? Like when I talk about mission, there's a lot of different versions of missions across companies, but I'm talking about like, what audience are you trying to benefit? How are you trying to contribute to the world in one way or another? Your mission, your overall culture, their general goals that appeal to a general audience, your industry, right? That's a little more tangential than talking specifically about what you offer. So we're going to lean more on the right side of this today because of those benefits that I mentioned at the top. And I'm going to show you some examples, not only of like how to create this, but the types of results you can see if you do. So on the topical side, usually means more brand authority with an asterisk. More brand authority just because you're talking specifically about what you offer. There are definitely authority benefits on the tangential side, but they're probably more in the SEO category. Also, topical is way more likely to convert. I think a problem people have sometimes is they go into tangential content and they're hoping they're going to get conversions or really immediate referral traffic that converts, and it's not designed for that. So setting that expectation up front is really helpful. Tangential is much more about brand awareness, as I'd mentioned, and a greater reach. And when you're able to do that, you can leverage that and get some more SEO benefit and start building your brand authority, especially if you use the strategy that I'm going to talk about. But again, I said brand mission, not your product, your service, or your company culture. We're going to stay away from that. I'm just reiterating that. So the method that I want to talk about is newsworthy content, because this is kind of a way of getting the authority that comes with topical and adding it to your tangential. The reason for this is if you're creating top of the funnel content that's being picked up by news sites, that is very authoritative. If somebody sees your brand name being mentioned on a really respected site, that sends a signal, right? It's hard to measure that. You kind of inherently know, like, hey, we were in the Chicago Tribune. That's cool, right? Like people inherently know that that's valuable, but it's because you're sending this awareness signal in addition to the SEO benefits. So what I've focused on in my career and what we do at Stacker Studio is more on the newsworthy content side of things. It's top of the funnel. It appeals to a wider audience. It increases your awareness and your authority. And then it drives those follow links that everybody is so desperately after. So what the content you should be creating should look like is the in-between of your general brand mission or industry and some typical newsworthy elements. If it overlaps between those two things, you're really setting yourself up for success, because you're doing something that's still relevant to your general audience, but is appealing to respected publications and sites and influencers or whoever you're going to decide to move forward with this. So let's look at some real examples, because I can talk about the nebulous concepts forever, but it's a little easier when you have something to look at. So I have no affiliation with Redfin. I just use their blog as an example. These are both honestly pretty newsworthy. I think that they do a pretty good job in general, but I wanted to show some examples of how pieces of content can be on this topical or tangential kind of range. So on the left, I mean, Redfin's all about the housing market. So we're talking about the rent market tracker, the rental market tracker. That's very on brand for them, right? That's very relevant to them. This is like a report they put out regularly and makes sense for them to do. However, on the right side, we have 1 in 7 recent movers refuse to live in a place where abortion is fully legal. Just listening to that, you're like, whoa, right? Like that's going to be interesting to people in a lot of different ways. So it's not just going to be interesting to people who are looking to rent, right? That's going to be interesting to a much wider audience. So that's when I ask, which one do you think is more newsworthy? If you had to pitch one of these, if you yourself were assigned, pick one of these and go pitch it to a publication, which one would you pick? Probably the one on the right. I might be wrong. Maybe you're really good at pitching in the housing market and you have some ties, but I would pick the one on the right because you're talking about that whole industry plus the political slant, and that just adds a whole lot more interest in general, right? So this is what I want you thinking about as like homework if you're really into this topic. Every time you look at a blog, kind of ask yourself, where do I think this falls on the topical or tangential range? And you'll start seeing how most brands use a mix of both and set different objectives for each type. All right, so another example. This is one that we worked on. Enrique, yeah. I mean, listen, politics are a whole different story. I don't tend to dabble in that area. And if we do dabble in it, I'll speak for Stacker, it's much more objective. Like we just only report on data. And that's one way to get into more controversial topics. It's not about taking a side. It's about reporting on data and letting people do with it what they will. It's a little aside. Okay, so another example that's much less intense because we're talking about B2B and like the workplace. And I think all of us, it's a little more general and applicable to basically everybody. So PIN is one of our brand partners and they do internal communications with employees. So instead of only talking about internal employee communication, which would limit us pretty dramatically, and you'd run out of content pretty soon, and they probably have that on their site already anyway, as they should. We take a tangential approach. So we did a story, 10 aspects of remote work that employers and employees disagree on. So we can get into why this works. First of all, it's not specifically about internal business communication, but it's still interesting to their target audience, and it appeals to a more general readership. I mean, at this point, after COVID, how many people are working remotely and how many people have opinions on that? So a lot of people are involved in a story like this and would be interested to click on it. And as a result, the distribution network was very excited about it and it got like nearly 200 pickups, right? So again, that's because it was applicable to a wide audience. If we were only talking about like internal comms tools, there's no way that you would get nearly this number of pickups, but that's not what you would be creating it for.
Now, if you liked this Clearscope webinar snippet, don't forget to share, like, and subscribe so you don't miss out on more great tips and strategies from the industry's best SEOs and content marketers. Make sure to check out the Clearscope YouTube channel for more great content.